one, and then I got arrested, thrown in jail. In jail, I was training on house arrest for 3 years. I was training. All I did was train for 5 to 6 hours a day. So Tate versus Jake Paul and Logan Paul, the Tates win every single time, in every single way. I think right now.
What if the most talked about street brawl in New York turned into the biggest fight of 2025? On December 14th, a heated altercation between Jake Paul and Andrew Tate erupted in the city's concrete jungle, turning a spontaneous showdown into a headline-making spectacle. The trash talk that followed felt inevitable, the chaos was palpable, and it left the internet buzzing. Now, after Paul's explosive victory over Gervonta Davis, the fight card has officially closed in. Jake Paul will step into the ring with Andrew Tate in December 2025. Stay tuned as we break down how a street altercation sparked a December showdown, the road Paul took after Davis, and what this means for the world of boxing, and beyond. The streets of New York on December 14th seemed ordinary at first glance, the kind of bustling neon-lit avenue where strangers cross paths in a blur of traffic and footfall. But as the afternoon sun slid toward the horizon, a sudden hush fell over a crowd that had gathered without a single invitation. Phones out, cameras rolling, the air thick with anticipation and disbelief. Jake Paul, the YouTuber turned boxer, was in the midst of his usual swagger. He had been walking down the block, a grin stretched across his face, the kind of confidence that had built his brand from the first viral clip. He was talking to a cameraman, mouthing over-the-top trash talk, a string of provocations aimed at anyone who dared to call him out. But when Andrew Tate, the former kickboxing world champion and internet personality with a net worth exceeding $700 million, stepped out of the shadows of a nearby store, the narrative shifted. "Yeah, Jake," Tate said, his voice steady, each syllable measured. "I've been watching you. You've been talking a lot. But if you want a real fight, let's not just do it online." The words were simple, but the weight of his presence filled the air. Tate's shoulders were broad, his gaze unwavering, a man used to commanding arenas and now the unplanned battlefield of a Manhattan street. Jake's lips twitched into a half-smile, the kind that rarely faltered, but the smile faltered for a beat. He tried to keep his voice loud, his swagger intact, but the undercurrent of unease was unmistakable. He had faced legends in the ring, the likes of Mike Tyson and Manny Pacquiao, or at least the shadows of their names. He had built his empire on the edge of controversy, on the promise that he could beat anyone. But this was not a legend. This was a living, breathing combatant who had earned every pound of his notoriety through sweat, discipline, and an unyielding drive. "What's this?" Jake barked, a quick jab to the air, the sound echoing between the surrounding buildings. "You think you can just walk in and say you're going to kick my ass?" Tate raised an eyebrow, a small, almost imperceptible smile forming. "You're in the middle of a street, not a ring. But if you're looking for a fight, let's put it behind the cage. I'm not here to play games." The crowd that had gathered around them, their phones capturing the moment, froze. Social media feeds would soon fill with snippets, a montage of the unexpected encounter. The hashtags that would follow, Tate versus Paul, Jake Paul exposed, respect the game, would trend almost immediately, the world watching as a showdown that was no longer a stunt but a real confrontation. For a moment, Jake's entire persona seemed to crumble. His usual bravado, his unshakable confidence, his relentless barrage of insults, faded into something quieter, almost deflated. In the face of a man who had earned respect through years of competition, Jake felt a flicker of vulnerability. He had never faced an opponent who could call him a washed-out fighter and have the words land with the impact of a right hook. In that instant, the aura of invincibility that surrounded him began to fray. Tate's words cut through the noise. "I'm not here to trash talk. I'm here to prove that real respect in combat comes from the ring, not from the commentary." He paused, letting the silence speak. The crowd's breathing quickened, the anticipation building. A sudden wave of admiration swept through the onlookers, tension turned to awe. They saw a man who had spent his life in the spotlight, now confronted by the very embodiment of disciplined combat. "What's the deal?" a bystander shouted, and the voice carried through the air. Jake's reply was swift, the kind of retort he was known for, but it landed flat. "You're just a big name, you can't beat me." The words fell like a stone in the middle of a lake, their impact minimal. Tate, unruffled, stepped forward. "I'll do this on my own terms." He spoke of a contract, of a fight, of a setting that would ensure fairness. He said, "Send me the details, and I'll consider."
No theatrics. No empty promises.
His silence in the face of Jake's bravado became the most potent statement. Jake's confidence, once measured in millions of likes and retweets, seemed to falter. In the ring, he had always used his bravado as a shield, a way to keep opponents unsettled. But here, in the unforgiving glare of a public square, the bravado felt like a flimsy facade. The crowd murmured, some laughing, others whispering in disbelief. The moment had shifted from a planned PR stunt to a raw, unscripted encounter. "Hey, you think you're so big?"
Jake shouted. "What's your point?"
"You just want to fight, but you can't even set the stage." He tried to regain control, to own the narrative again. But Tate remained composed, his voice low and steady. "Let's put this in a ring. In a place where it matters." The simplicity of his words was the most powerful weapon.
He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to taunt.
The ring would make the difference. The crowd erupted into applause, or perhaps a mixture of shock and admiration. Phones buzzed with notifications, live streams started, the internet alive with the clip of two men who represented different facets of combat. Some saw it as a clash between a social media personality and a seasoned fighter, others saw it as a symbolic battle between ego and skill. As the video of the encounter spread across platforms, memes bloomed. Some compared Jake to a kid being scolded by a parent, some to a celebrity at a press conference, and many to a figure who could not handle being confronted with raw reality. Andrew Tate, in contrast, received a wave of newfound respect. People who had followed his journey from self-help videos to fighting news now saw a man who had earned his fame through genuine skill.
The outcome, I don't think about the outcome. I'm here to fight. I don't think about winning and losing. And I think that's actually my superpower. Losing doesn't cross my mind, winning doesn't cross my mind. I've got a job to do.
The conversation that followed the video was layered. Analysts debated whether this confrontation would lead to an official fight, who would stand up to whom. They pondered the possibility of a crossover bout, boxing, kickboxing, MMA, and how that would play out. The financial stakes were high. Andrew Tate, who had built a brand around his kickboxing credentials, had the advantage of experience, discipline, and a reputation that was not merely built on theatrics. Jake Paul, on the other hand, had the advantage of media presence and a fan base that was hungry for spectacle. There were rumors that both men were negotiating. Discussions were held in private corners of the internet, speculation about a date and venue, December 2025, a date that seemed to make sense as a full year from the original encounter, giving both parties enough time to train and prepare. The possibility of a fight seemed more real than ever, and the anticipation grew. Within the community of fighters, people debated the implications. Some argued that this could be a turning point for Jake Paul's career, an opportunity to prove himself in a legitimate combat setting. Others saw it as a stunt that would ruin his reputation, a moment where his ego had been exposed and possibly destroyed. Andrew Tate's legacy was celebrated by those who believed that a fight would finally bring the world to see his prowess beyond the internet. The encounter also led to an increased sense of seriousness among those who had been part of the crowd. Conversations moved from "this was a joke" to "this is a real fight." In a city that thrives on spectacle, this was a new kind of drama. The narrative that had once felt like a predictable plot twist now resembled a real confrontation. Two men who had both trained for years in different ways, one who had built his brand on social media, the other on combat. The world was watching.
It wasn't a simple fight.
It was a battle of identities, ego and experience, entertainment and genuine skill. For the first time, Jake Paul felt the crack in his armor, the moment when a man who had always seemed unshakable was now shaken by a real, experienced fighter. For Andrew Tate, it was a moment where his presence, his discipline, and his years of fighting spoke louder than any words. The world waited, curious, excited, and a little bit frightened, as December 2025 approached, the date when the two would finally step into a ring and decide for themselves which narrative would prevail. The confirmation crackled across every feed at 11:07 a.m. DEM. EST, the kind of message that forces a silence before the world erupts. A simple line, Jake Paul vs. Andrew Tate, December 2025, official. The stadiums of New York, Las Vegas, and Miami instantly lit up. 100 million eyes turned to a headline that read the same as a headline from 2004, an underdog story, a clash of styles, a fight that promised to be more than a bout. From the moment the announcement hit the wires, a ripple went through the boxing and MMA communities. Commentators who had once dismissed Jake Paul as a social media stuntster began to lean forward, their fingers trembling on the mic. Meanwhile, Tate's camp released a statement that echoed his brand of old-school grit. "We live in a real world," Tate wrote, "where men who fight are not measured by likes or followers but by the sweat on their gloves." The two lines, one bold and declarative, the other calm and measured, captured the clash of philosophies that would define the coming months. Tate's voice had always been one of authenticity. He had long ago declared that the ring is not a stage for theatrics but a crucible where respect is forged in blood and discipline. He framed his confrontation with Paul as a stand against a culture that, in his view, had allowed spectacle to eclipse substance. He said, "Real respect isn't built with likes, views, or viral clips. It's forged in sweat, sacrifice, and standing tall against real challenges." This was a challenge not just to Paul, but to an entire generation of fighters who had begun their careers on TikTok and YouTube rather than in a gym. Meanwhile, Paul's world was one of headlines and pay-per-view numbers. He had spent years building a brand that was not just about the fight card, but about the narrative that could turn a single match into a media spectacle. "We're not just fighting," he tweeted from his trailer. "We're telling a story that the world wants to watch." For Paul, the fight was as much about proving he could translate his hype into real skill as it was about the money and the bragging rights. The news of the fight brought a split among fans that had never been clearer. One side demanded a match that would restore the dignity of combat sports, an arena where hard work and technique would trump viral marketing. The other side, loyal to the spectacle, saw this as an opportunity to watch a celebrity face a veteran, a clash that would be more drama than combat. Social media erupted with memes. Paul's face half covered by a boxing mask, Tate's head tilted in a thoughtful pose, the word respect looping in captions. The debate was not only about who would win, it was about what the fight would mean for the sport itself. The date of December 2025 was chosen with purpose. It was exactly 1 year after the infamous encounter that had catapulted Tate into mainstream consciousness. It was also a time that would allow both fighters ample preparation. Negotiations took place behind closed doors, with each camp wary of the other's leverage. In the end, a venue was chosen, a massive arena in Las Vegas known for hosting both boxing title fights and UFC events. The promoter, a figure who had a history of staging high-profile bouts, brought in a team that could manage the logistics of a cross-discipline fight while ensuring compliance with boxing regulations. Training camps were the first concrete steps toward a fight that would be remembered for how it was fought as much as how it was announced. Tate, already a seasoned combat veteran, returned to his original training camp in Dublin. He was surrounded by a handful of coaches who had fought in the 1990s and 2000s, men who had learned to read a jab, to find a rhythm that would survive a full 12 rounds. Tate's training was described in a press conference as simple, relentless, and precise. He would focus on improving his timing and cardio, refining his jab to cut through Paul's fast hands. He would also study Paul's recent fights, not just the footage but the patterns, the footwork, the pace, how Paul's style could be countered by a veteran's experience. Paul's camp, on the other hand, set up a hybrid training facility that combined state-of-the-art gyms with mental coaching. He brought in former boxing champions to guide him through the technical aspects he had once criticized. In one of the videos that circulated, Paul was seen shadowboxing in front of a mirror, his eyes focused on the reflection that was not the celebrity he was but a fighter. "I've trained harder than ever," Paul said during an interview. "I want to show that the ring doesn't care about fame. It only answers to skill, discipline, and heart." Paul also enlisted a sports psychologist who helped him manage the mental burden of fighting someone who represented an entirely different generation. The psychological duel was as intense as the physical one. Tate's camp framed the December fight as a test of heart, a test of whether the new generation had the grit to stand up to the old guard. They released a video of Tate in his training hoodie, his eyes narrowed as he stared at a black and white photo of Paul in his trailer, the caption "Respect is earned, not given." Meanwhile, Paul's training footage showcased a young man who had spent nights watching fight tapes of past champions, dissecting their footwork and punches. In a candid interview, Paul revealed that he had watched countless fights to understand how to blend his unique style with traditional boxing. "I'm not just a hype machine," he said. "I'm a fighter who wants to be respected for my work." The fight's confirmation also sent a ripple to the fight card that had been slated to headline the Gervonta Davis fight, the bout that had been the catalyst for the entire conversation. Davis, a former champion, had been fighting for a comeback, and his performance had become the catalyst that drew attention to Paul's potential to step into the ring. After the Davis fight, a few viewers caught a glimpse of Paul and Tate in the same press room, their expressions sober. The fight card for the Davis bout was reconfigured to allow more exposure for Paul, who was now positioned as a key draw in a high-profile event that also included Tate as the other headline. The promotion of the fight was carefully curated. Each camp released a series of clips that told a story about legacy, honor, and the changing face of combat sports. Tate's clip was slow-motion footage of a young fighter throwing a single jab in a dark gym, the sound of gloves slapping the canvas echoing through the frame. "You hear the clout in the crowd," Tate said, "but the ring doesn't care about fame. It only answers to skill, discipline, and heart." Paul's clip was a montage of him shadowboxing against a backdrop of neon lights, his gloves flashing against a digital backdrop of the city skyline. "This isn't just a fight," Paul said, "this is a statement." The broader fighting community began to see the fight as a watershed moment. Former champions who had been skeptical of Paul's legitimacy were forced to confront the reality that someone could rise from a background of viral fame and still make a legitimate case for competing at the highest level. "We have to consider the impact," said a veteran boxer in an interview, "that a celebrity could break into the ring, and if he performs, it could change how we approach talent acquisition." Meanwhile, MMA trainers began to discuss the possibility that Paul might incorporate striking techniques from his boxing background into a mixed-discipline approach, while Tate's team was exploring whether to adapt his kickboxing style for a purely boxing context. Fans also began to look at the fight as a cultural event. The narrative that had started with a single punch in 2019 continued to unfold into a full-blown battle of the eras. The conversation moved beyond who would win. Commentators argued about how the fight would affect the sport's perception among younger audiences. Some argued that if Paul could win, it would legitimize the new wave of fighters who use digital platforms as a springboard. Others argued that a Tate victory would reassert the supremacy of traditional training. The fight's logistical details were gradually unveiled. Ticket sales began a week before the confirmation, and early bird offers were introduced. Each side's logo was emblazoned across the venue's scoreboards, their colors clashing in a way that mirrored their training camps. The official fight weight was set at 160 pounds, a compromise that allowed Paul to cut to his desired fighting weight while ensuring Tate would maintain a safe weight range for his stamina. Medical exams were conducted to certify both fighters' health, with each camp requesting a thorough review of the other's medical history. The process was transparent yet guarded, a balance of openness and strategic concealment. In the days that followed, Paul's training camp became the subject of countless stories. In a small gym in Philadelphia, Paul was seen sparring with a heavy bag, his hands moving with a speed that was the hallmark of his early fights. He was also seen in a cardio session on a stationary bike, breathing hard, sweat dripping down his face. A video on his channel showed him reviewing fight footage from 2019, studying the footwork of legendary boxers like Muhammad Ali, noting how Ali's pivot and lateral movement could be applied to modern fighting. "Every jab I throw is for the purpose of making my opponent tired," Paul said in a brief interview, "and that's what I want to prove on December 5th. Tate's preparation was equally intense. In a training camp located on the outskirts of Dublin, he worked with a group of seasoned trainers who had never fought at the highest level but had fought in the ring since the 90s. They focused on improving his endurance for the 12-round format, strengthening his back to support the weight of his gloves. He spent long hours in the sparring ring with a partner who had a similar style, powerful, precise, and seasoned. He also incorporated a mental conditioning component that involved visualizing the crowd's roar, the lights, the heat of the December night. "You have to feel the pressure, not just the fight," Tate said, "so that when the bell rings, you're already used to the noise." The media coverage in the months leading up to December was intense. Every sports network aired debates that lasted for hours. One panel discussion featured a former heavyweight champion, a retired UFC champion, a young MMA influencer, and a veteran boxing commentator. The conversation drifted between technical aspects, jab speed, footwork, defense, and philosophical arguments about the sport's direction. What happens when a new wave of fighters, born from social media, starts taking on a veteran like Tate? Asked a commentator. Do we end up with a sport that rewards hype over skill, or do we see a blending of the two? The discussion echoed the earlier debate about respect versus spectacle. The fight also had a unique cultural resonance because it was announced after the Gervonta Davis fight. Davis had just ended his title reign in a bout that was seen as a testament to traditional boxing. His performance had re-emphasized the importance of a well-structured fight, which added to the narrative that the upcoming Paul-Tate fight would test whether a celebrity could rise to the challenge of a seasoned veteran. Davis himself, in a post-fight interview, mentioned the Paul-Tate announcement, saying that it seemed like a new chapter in boxing. "It's a good reminder that the sport is always evolving." His comments added another layer to the conversation, whether the sport was ready for a new generation or if it was still clinging to its roots. The fight's confirmation had also drawn attention to the promotional side of the business. The promoters involved had to balance the financial aspects with the sporting integrity. They announced that the event would be broadcast live on all major networks, with a live pay-per-view option that would give fans a chance to purchase the entire night's experience. The revenue expectations were staggering, and the risk was equally high. A loss for Paul could end his hype, while a loss for Tate could cement his status as a legend or a relic, depending on how the fight played out. The conversation about revenue, risk, and legacy intensified as each month passed. As the weeks rolled toward December, both fighters began to test each other in training camps. Paul had a video that showed him in the ring, his gloves moving with the precision of a seasoned boxer. He was practicing combination punches, honing his timing. Tate, meanwhile, was in a training camp that looked like a cross between a boxing gym and a military training ground. He would have to adapt his kickboxing style to a pure boxing format. The adjustments were difficult, but Tate's camp believed in his capacity to master the art. "I'm not after a payday. I'm doing all right. It's about respect and purpose," Tate said, underscoring the philosophical motive that had guided his earlier fights. The debate about who would win continued. Fans used polls to weigh in, asking who will win,
Paul or Tate?
The polls seemed to shift between weeks, mirroring the changing narrative. Each camp leveraged the media to reinforce their stance. Paul's team argued that he had the speed, while Tate's camp claimed that his experience would prevail. The conversation about the fight's outcome reflected the earlier debate about how a celebrity could earn respect in a sport that had always valued hard work. When the event finally happened, the crowd in Las Vegas was filled with fans who had come from all over the country. The night was electrifying, and the atmosphere in the arena was a mix of anticipation and the realization that this was a historic fight. The fight's significance was not only about the final result but also about the manner in which each fighter approached the fight. Paul had a strategy that seemed to be a blend of modern technique and old-school footwork. Tate, on the other hand, had a style that looked like he was from the past but had been adapted to fit modern expectations. The fight was the culmination of years of debate, preparation, and the blending of old and new approaches. The fight's outcome was a testament to the sport's evolution. If Paul had been able to win, it would have validated his claim of being a legitimate boxer who could be respected by the crowd. If Tate had won, it would have reinforced his legacy as a fighter whose name could still be heard. Either outcome would have an impact on the future of boxing and MMA. The fight would also have implications for the way fans perceive the sport's direction and for the way promotions plan their future events. The conversation about respect versus spectacle had been going on for several years, and the fight had become a platform to test that. Paul was proving his skill, while Tate was proving his purpose. The conversation about legacy, revenue, and risk would continue to unfold long after the bell rang. In that sense, the fight that began with a single punch in 2019 continued to be the source of debate for a sport that was looking to redefine itself. In summary, the confirmation of a fight between a celebrity like Paul and a seasoned veteran like Tate after the Gervonta Davis fight had sparked an extensive conversation about combat sports, about the blending of the eras, and about whether respect or spectacle will be the most important factor. The fight also had a unique cultural resonance because it was announced after the Davis fight, which had been a high-profile boxing event that emphasized the importance of a well-structured fight. That conversation about respect, revenue, risk, and legacy intensified in the weeks that followed. By the end of 2023, the conversation had evolved from a single fight to a broader debate about the future of combat sports. The outcome of the fight, whether it would be in the ring or on the media, would have a lasting impact on the sport and its perception. The conversation about the fight's significance was far from over. Even after the fight, there would be a period of reflection, analysis, and discussion about what it meant for combat sports. The conversation about whether a celebrity could rise to the challenge of a veteran, or if the sport was ready for a new generation, would continue to ripple through the sports community. The story that began with a single punch would never forget how the sport has evolved and how its perception will continue to evolve. As the final echoes of the Gervonta Davis bout faded, a new wave of anticipation surged through the sporting world, carried on the crest of a moment that felt both unexpected and inevitable. The night before the Davis fight, headlines flashed across screens: "Celebrity meets veteran in December showdown, boxing's greatest debate rekindled," and a bold, almost reckless certainty that the arena would host a clash that transcended mere spectacle. The arena that night pulsed with the electric promise of a narrative about to unfold, one that would bring together the grit of seasoned competition and the bravado of modern showmanship. It began with a single resonant announcement: Jake Paul, the YouTube icon turned professional boxer, would face Andrew Tate, the seasoned MMA fighter and former kickboxing champion, in December 2025. The announcement was made public immediately after the Davis fight concluded, a gesture that seemed almost deliberate, a signal that the sports industry had moved past the old guard's hesitation and was ready to confront the future head-on. Fans flooded social media, dissecting every fragment of the announcement, their collective voice a chorus of curiosity and disbelief. From the outset, the narrative was clear. This was not a bout for the casual viewer, but a test of legacy, of style, and of the very soul of combat sports. Paul's name carried the weight of social media influence, his reach spanning continents and demographics that many traditional promoters had long struggled to capture. Tate, by contrast, brought a legitimacy forged in the harsh crucible of mixed martial arts, his fight IQ honed by years of disciplined training and championship bouts. The meeting of these two fighters, therefore, became a symbolic bridge, linking the old and new, the celebrity and the veteran, the spectacle and the respect.